Good afternoon, fellow citizens. Welcome to the Citizens Chat Room, a room of ideas. Today we are discussing a very interesting topic. I would want to shed some light into it before we get the real engagements towards it. In yet another cooling of relations between Kampala and its Western allies, the United States has announced visa restrictions on Uganda officials who are believed to have undermined the democratic process in the country. Today, I am announcing visa restrictions on those believed to be responsible for or complicit in undermining democratic process in Uganda, including during the country's January 14 general elections, the campaign period that preceded it. Mr. Blinken said in a press statement issued by the State Department on Friday, 16th April 2021. The statement said that Uganda government actions represented a continuing downward trajectory for the country's democracy and respect for human rights as recognized and protected by Uganda's constitution. This is the discussion we are having today. We want to internalize and actually try to get the real context of the role of international community in protecting human rights, the case of US sanctions against Ugandan security systems. Joined today are on my panel. I'm your host, Demiano Masesa, and from the far right is Joseph Ochieno, almost a regular panelist. Thank you, Ochieno, for always coming through. Ochieno is, of course, contesting for the U.P.C seat. We hope to see you there soon. Yeah. Next to Ochieno is...
At which level? At the village branch or
You'll tell us at which level, yeah?
Tell us the democracy, U.P.C.
At the most senior level, well, I expect to have Morison, a key player in my team.
So you have Morison on.
I will share with you my CV.
That might be the government of national unity.
Yeah, we're looking forward to that too.
Then next to him is Morison Rwakakamba, our resident panelist. Morison, we missed you last Friday. Good to see you again.
Yeah, some farming activities, but I'm happy to be back.
Thank you. Morison is the executive director of Agency for Transformation, and he's always with us here. Next to Morison,
From Nyiwingo.
Nyiwingo,
Yes.
that's Rukunjiri.
Yes.
Interesting.
The crowd of presidential contenders who never make it.
Never make it.
Contenders.
No, that's it.
Next to Morison is a very familiar face in the sports world also. Yeah, it's Munduru. She's a program manager, Democratic Governance, Action Aid Uganda. But she's also a sports fanatic.
Manager.
Yeah, the sports manager.
Oh, yes.
Yes, with Odum Paraka. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. Welcome, Masi.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here.
I am her boss, actually.
Interesting. So we'll have a discussion on that also. We'll
Yes.
have a different panel for sports as well.
Yes, civic space should include a component for sports.
I'll merely be an observer.
There's a lot of suckers and struggles in the FUFA, so we need to also have a conversation around that.
Yeah,
So next to me here is Arinaitwe Rugyendo, very familiar face with in the journalism world. He's a journalist, a Desmond Tutu fellow, and a PhD student. You always want to add on that. Yeah. PhD student. So welcome.
Thank you very much, Demiano.
Yes. And to get back and straight into our discussion today, I think I'll need to start with the ladies since you're the only lady on the panel. We apologize, Sarah couldn't be with us today. She got a very urgent engagement that took her off, but we hope to see her next Friday. So, Masi, starting with you, what is the origin of the sanctions and what role do they play in promoting democracy and protecting human rights?
Thank you, Damian. I think it's very important for us to lay context to the issue of sanctions. We shouldn't take for granted that for something that has been making grounds in the media, our viewers, especially of Civic Space TV, may even know what a sanction is by definition, or its origin and how it has evolved over the years. So I think it's very important for us to lay that foundation for them. So if you can allow me just to get to your question from a contextual point of view. So sanctions in nature really actions, collective actions, or sometimes they may also be unilateral in nature that are aimed at really stopping certain actions that are viewed as violation of international law, and specifically really with regards to human rights and rights violations generally. And right from its evolution, really, in the 19th century, we would see the way sanctions played at the time was very different from what they look like today. Back in the day, it was more of, blockades. And where, I'll just give a visible example, at the time at which Greece was trying to break off from Turkey at the time, different countries, such as France, Russia, Britain, came and put blockades at the shores to stop, Egypt and forces of Turkey from further escalating the conflict that was prevailing at the time. They were not at war with Turkey particularly, but their role was a role of concern for the events that were unfolding in this process. And I think this replicated in different countries over the years, and with the evolution of international law, the way sanctions have played has also significantly changed. And specifically, with different countries ratifying to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, you realize that the way sanctions play now is more in a global perspective, and specifically with regards to violations that are considered as violations against international law. So that then gives power to the international community to be concerned about the human rights situation of any nation that has ratified to these international instruments. They have a right to be concerned with the situation, with the human rights situation or any other of any country in the globe. And Uganda as a country being a signatory to most of these instruments, especially the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which also we can see domesticated in our own law, in our constitution in Chapter 4, now makes Uganda not just, accountable to its citizens, but also to the global community. And I think that in itself explains why Uganda is in the situation where it is today, why you have visibly read what you have read with regards to sanctions. And over that time, we have also seen targeted sanctions, especially against individuals, not just against countries. Individuals that have been viewed as, offenders or violators of human rights. And I think in the case of Uganda, this is not the first time. We have had similar circumstances before, especially with the former AIGP. And narrowing it down to the situation between Uganda and the United States, we know that right from the Global Magnitsky Act, from the time it was signed into law, its application has become global in nature. That is why at the time at which our own former IGP was sanctioned by the US, this act was already in force. And we also see it very prominent at the background of the sanctions that we have been discussing, especially in the media space this week. So the US in itself issuing sanctions against individuals in Uganda is because of the global manifestation of human rights. Human rights are universal in nature, even in its definition. So countries and other states, even outside of our own region of Africa, have been observing, have been having an eye on the human rights situation of Uganda. Very many countries have interest in this country, and therefore the sovereignty of this country is not just about our territory, but it's also its people. What is the human rights situation of the citizens of Uganda? How is Uganda being governed? So even looking at sovereignty in itself transcends just our territory. It goes to the people of Uganda and how the people of Uganda are being governed. That's why now the issue of democracy, the issue of human rights becomes an issue of concern. Because if the human rights situation is in Uganda is, going down a steep, then that has any country that upholds human rights, that is concerned about, Uganda in itself, even protecting and promoting the rights of human rights, has a right to act, has a right to sanction has a right to raise concerns in any forum about the situation in Uganda, because we all know that the US, for example, as a country, and Uganda have interests. The US has interests in Uganda. It does invest in Uganda, whether directly in our health sector or other, added benefits and interests that they have in this country through, be it business, be it even through civil society where we sit, and different areas of interest that they have. So sanctions in itself should not be looked at just in this context as, a politicized issue. Yes, it is politicized, but we must look at it from that framework of the universality of human rights and the fact that even these sanctions in themselves, in reading this statement, a lot of focus is on issues of democracy, on issues of rights, and on issues that attract global interest beyond just Uganda in itself. Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much, Masi. I think I'll need then to go straight to Ochieno. Since you appreciate so much international politics, can you try to bring that to context, actually, especially bring it down home?
Yeah, I'll contextualize it. I think Mas has really helped us with the broader context and definition. But I'll only add slightly little that sanctions generally are sort of, if you like, one of the few means of last resort, short of the UN or major powers, in this case beyond blockages, perhaps going to war or bombing, like in the case of, say, with Iraq. But for our viewers, and particularly for this country and this continent, and before I say that, I think it's really a shame that this is my 30th year in formal, active politics and campaigns around human rights and democracy in this country. And having engaged the US, the Commonwealth, and all these guys, that would reach a stage in which these guys actually sanction individuals, groups, or communities, or even anything to do with this country, shows basically the downward trajectory as far as the expectations of these powers are on Uganda. So I'm sure it must have been a very difficult decision for these guys, because these have been powerful friends of this regime. Number one. And number two, as I said, because it sort of tends to be a remedial act when diplomacy and many other things have failed, where clearly there are concerns about mainly human rights abuses or breaches of either international law, conventions that maybe the UN is concerned about, or major agencies or organizations say like the Commonwealth. But as a young activist, the biggest contradiction around these issues were sanctions against South Africa, where at the time all sensible nations in the world wanted the world to isolate South Africa, apartheid regime in South Africa, and apartheid regime in Zimbabwe. And the biggest backers were Britain and America. And of course, Mr. Museveni might be quite happy that I'm referring to that, but I'm emphasizing it as an important point. And that is, at the time, those powers were arguing that sanctions against South Africa and Zimbabwe would impact on the ordinary citizens. And I recall Margaret Thatcher, and sometimes you really don't even want to watch TV. Interestingly, brought forward home, these ones have been very specifically targeted sanctions against individuals. Part of the debate I've seen, including on social media, on whether or not this impacts directly on the country and the citizenry, including the performance of government. I think this government should not tomorrow wake up and claim that the lack of medicine in hospitals is because there have been sanctions. There's been very specifically targeted. And maybe at a later stage, we might be able to discuss who the individuals' personalities and their natures are. So generally, it's very much about that. If you see from the reactions of the government, maybe I'm rushing in, it is sort of slightly dismissive. But really, as far as the historical and global issues around sanctions are concerned, I really don't think nations and governments should reach this. But that they've actually opted for this about individuals is to show that quite clearly there's something fundamentally wrong. I also know that around the world, more recently, sanctions against Zimbabwe were very globally political. This government cannot compare it with that. That one crippled Zimbabwe. It was alleged to have been targeted at individuals. It's indeed the vast majority of the citizens of Zimbabwe suffered, and it impacted economically on the country called Zimbabwe. This one here, I think what the Uganda government needs to be able to do is to recognize that the issues, let us have a public debate about the personalities, individuals, and organizations involved, perhaps review and take responsibility and make sure that Uganda continues being part of the international community. And I'm sure quite like part of what Mas is saying, America is not only a friend of Uganda in that way. Uganda is a major quisling for the Americans, particularly when it comes to regional security, strategic issues. The military in East Central, the Horn, Central Africa, and all. So I'm not quite sure whether America necessarily wants to have wars and battles with Uganda. I think all that America, and I'm sure many of these other countries want, is that we should come back to civility. We've had a conversation here about a question of human rights abuse and indeed how the recent elections were conducted. I think perhaps this is basically just a mere signal. And if there's anybody in the panel who has a slightly different view, the point here is that I think let's use this as a wake-up call as citizens, that it gives us opportunity to be able to discuss where really we are as a country. Because the last time this sanctions business were discussed in this country was when Idi Amin regime was isolated. And I recall I was only telling some young groups yesterday that the business of coffee smuggling into Kenya, where was to cripple down Amin's regime, to isolate it and make sure that Amin could not have foreign exchange at the time. So Kenya benefited, and ordinary Ugandans who were doing business benefited. Fast forward, I know in the early part of the U.P.C government, Mr. Museveni and others attempted actually to push for sanctions against the then elected government, but of course they didn't have grounds. But that's a slightly different history. It's a slightly different story. I think by and large, it's basically a wake-up call. It's a shameful thing. It's a rare way of doing business, except possibly when you take up their big countries of interest, Iraq, Iran, where these guys basically want to cripple regimes or cripple individuals. As far as Uganda is concerned, there's no evidence that the Americans necessarily want to cripple this regime or cripple individuals. It is simply a punitive measure, a mitigating option, and usually possibly a second last option to simply saying that we had enough with you.
Thank you very much, Ochieno. Morison, we don't want to believe that you'll be on the list very soon. No, let's not hope so. Okay, now to in there. Do you think really these sanctions promote democracy and human rights?
Why would you want me to be to be sanctioned? That is quite strange.
Yeah, okay.
But I think that broadly, the question we should be discussing is whether sanctions, just like Masay and my brother Joseph articulated them, are an effective way of accentuating democracy anywhere in the world. And I don't think the evidence that we have from scholarly or any other materials really point to where sanctions actually facilitate democratization of any country. And I think that the graveyard is filled with failed experiments to that extent, because if you look at, for example, U.S. sanctions in Venezuela, it became very clear that one, they didn't work. They never brought in a government that would actually work for the people, but also that sanctions in Venezuela have practically, and this is very empirical by think tanks and other scientific journals that have pointed to suffering of women, death of so many people, even inability to bring in humanitarian related aspects that are usually pushed in by civil society, Red Cross, to help the real people. So I think sanctions, not even just in Venezuela, look at Iran, when sanctions were pulled against Iran, it only strengthened the faith, in the Ayatollah system and his government. Because remember, these sanctions also come with this nationalistic element. Because when people are struggling internally on their own, trying to shape their own destiny, but then there is this power that says, for us, we are sanctioning. Many individuals in those countries, patriots, will begin to ask questions. Okay, we have our own challenges here and problems, but who are you to think that you are going to determine the democratic path that we want to take, you as a foreign entity? And I think those who put sanctions ahead of actually stimulating civic conversation within those nation states create a big problem. Because I think that democratizations and sustainable democratization and transitions can only be pursued by citizens of those nation states to be able to organize, mobilize, and even if there were human rights problems and challenges, but when citizens organize against, a state that is, for instance, interested in harming rights, that is why you get a positive response. But where you pursue sanctions by a foreign entity, you actually create what my brother Joseph calls a quizzing. So citizens begin to think, are these people trying to bring a quisling or a puppet to actually run our affairs by using what they call targeted or otherwise broader sanctions? And the citizens would ask that question. Are they plotting to actually remove our government that we elected, even if we could have challenges here and there in the elections, in order to bring a puppet or a quisling to be able to run our affairs? And make no mistake, because Africans and other historically dominated societies have the wherewithal, the discernment to see through some of those tendencies. Then the other aspect that I wanted to mention really is that U.S. sanctions, again according to empirics that we've seen, have affected over 200 million citizens, pushed them more into poverty and death, across the world, and strengthened actually regimes that they are accusing, of facilitating or of being behind, violations and human rights. And also the journal and scientific papers I've been reading also show me that U.S., by pursuing what you'd call unilateral sanctions, he's actually violating Vienna Accords, under the rubric of international law. If it were UN sanctions, to Masa's point, where Uganda is a signatory and it has ratified at home, then you would say this means something. But for U.S. unilateral sanctions, whereas they have a right as a sovereign to do whatever they want to do in their relationship with other nation states, but if we are to look at the Vienna Accords within the UN system, unilateral sanctions against the nation states, are not necessarily legitimate. The final bit is that if you have sanctioned individuals, for example, for the case of Uganda, to not enter your state through visa restrictions, okay, be transparent. Say, Mr. Ochieno, you participated in ABCD. We have the evidence. You cannot come to the United States. Actually, that would even help the municipal system or the local system, because we have our own courts as a sovereign, and we try individuals, who commit crimes. Then we would say, Joseph, the U.S. has helped us produce this evidence against you. They have actually even restricted, they don't even want you to go to their country. But perhaps as a country, as a state, because we have state institutions, the police and all these other, the DPP, then they would look into those activities. And if those activities have the merit, then you should be pursued according to the law. If they don't have a merit, then you should be free. But if you are saying we are issuing sanctions that are secret, and we don't want to mention the individuals who have been sanctioned, well, if you're a transparent actor, why are you doing that? So I think there is more to investigate, to look at, than mere celebration of a certain foreign power that would want to come and say, we are pursuing sanctions against the nation state of Uganda, and Ugandans who have craved for this independence, self-determination, having the ability to determine their own destiny, we look at it as some level of interference, but also, a king's pursuit to bestow a quizzing or a puppet on the Republic of Uganda.
Thank you very much, Morison, for that. Then also, let me get to Ndugu Rugyendo. Would you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah,
But
actually,
before you do that,
yes.
you could also answer what is possibly Uganda government's position on the sanctions.
Oh my God.
As you weigh in there.
Uganda government's position, I don't work for government, so I don't know.
As a journalist,
what could
possibly
be their
you must
position.
have,
But I think, thank you very much.
Yes.
First of all, I want to, I think probably correct something in this debate. Sanctions is serious business. What the business we are in now as a country is that Uganda is not under any sanctions, not any individual, probably, like somebody here said, talked of the former IGP. What we have are visa restrictions, and we need to understand the difference. And the difference is this, that one, in the US system, I think Ochieno would know, when the US issues sanctions or orders sanctions, these are executive orders by the head of state. And the Congress really empowers him to do that. And normally these sanctions come into, usually it could be country to country or country to individuals, but also come in form of hard sanctions. Hard sanctions usually is where he will declare that so and so is this, and they will mention them. That would be the hard. No, that would be the soft part. But the hard one is where they involve confrontation and war. This is not what has happened in Uganda. In this context now, we have the second tier that happens in the U.S. system, which is now where the Congress empowers the Secretary of State under the, I think they call it the Immigration and Naturalization Something Act. I'm not a lawyer, but where now the issue visa restrictions, and usually what happens, they will not mention the names. You just wake up one day, like you were here joking with Morison. Morison wakes up one day, he wants to go back to Harvard, then goes in Zambia, and they say, there are some things you need to answer here, and then they will not give you the visa. That's when you know that you are actually on the list. People, as I speak now, nobody knows who is on the list, and it's difficult to know, because that's how the system works. But what is the point that I'm making? Countries talk to each other through diplomatic notes, through diplomatic instruments, and these are some of the instruments they use. Even visa restrictions is part of diplomacy. Even if you talk of even sanctions, these are diplomatic undertakings. But for me, I want to agree with I think it was Masay, I think Ochieno, that I think the US and Uganda really are not having very serious issues, because if there were serious issues, we would know who these people are, and they wouldn't be talking about visa restrictions. It would be pure sanctions. And when it is sanctions, it is serious in terms of the fact that if it's individuals who are sanctioned, then even the country is affected, because anything you do in the name of the state that you serve, the state is also questioned. There is something they call, there's some bank, I would call it the BOU of the international system, which is, I think, the Bank of International Transfers, something, systems. It is based in Switzerland. That's where all governments of the world, their transactions are cleared before you can see them within your systems.
International clearing system.
Let me simplify it that way. If that is not happening, and Uganda is not, you're not having any delays in our transactions, then we're still moving on. So the way I want to understand it is that Uganda, being a strategic partner of the United States, especially in the Horn and even within this region, I want to believe the US sought to sort of give some empty glass to voices that wanted to be heard, and ultimately, and this is what we have at the moment, and I think everybody is now quiet, because the US knows that they cannot antagonize an ally of the nature that is Uganda. Otherwise, many things fall apart. However,
I think then they wouldn't have make it public. But you see, it is a statement that came out.
That's what Joseph is asking. He says, where are these individuals? There is a reason why you can't see those individuals. It's a diplomatic engagement, and but we need to understand it in another way. What is international about these measures? You see, for me, the concept of internationalism or internationalization is the interplay of nations being able to relate with mutual respect. Okay, and the moment you had only 5 members out of 200 countries controlling the international system, then the international system ceases to be, and where you have even one country like the United States single-handedly issuing certain instruments against a nation, that's interference, and it is the reason then I would believe these instruments actually ultimately don't help the growth of democracy, because they undermine the very essence of international existence.
Thank you very much, Rugyendo. To Mase, I want to ask, is the application of these sanctions likely to remarkably alter the environment of the political environment in Uganda, here and abroad?
Well, I just would like to say something to my colleague here, that we like to hide our head in the sand, for lack of a better word. What we are discussing today is a public statement or a public pronouncement of an action of the U.S. And the U.S. has provided a very clear basis and background against which these decisions have been made. Sanctions in themselves do not manifest in the same way. And as he rightfully put, there are levels to sanctions, and travel restrictions and bans are one of them. Of course, because we are trying to be dismissive, we may say that these travel restrictions have a very small implication. But if you look at the Global Magnitsky Human Rights Accountability Act in itself, where these actions are drawn from, and its global application now, and the fact that even the European Union has adopted, this law, if you look at the circumstances under which these restrictions can be issued, then you realize that this is not a small matter. And I must also reiterate that the circumstances that were listed in the US's communication are informed by realities of Uganda and the context as is. And as a citizen of Uganda who has witnessed, and as a person that has also been in the civil society sector, I can only agree on what has been happening in this country. That is not something we can hide from the world. We cannot hide it from ourselves. It has been a serious concern even for the citizens in country. We have seen how citizens have constantly been pushing for accountability for what they perceive as gross violations of human rights. And even if you looked at the Rome Statute in itself, and if you look at Article 7 and you look at some of the listings of what would otherwise lead to even sanctions at a certain level, and by definition looking at kidnaps, looking at murders, looking at all forms of violations, and you put that alongside the context of Uganda, you would not categorize these actions as actions that are meant to perhaps facilitate certain political actions. That could be the agenda, I do not know. But one thing that I know is that, indeed, the situation of human rights in Uganda is wanting. And there is a quest for accountability, both domestically, and I am not shocked that internationally, the same level of accountability is being demanded. The grounds have been clearly listed, and these grounds are on our face. We cannot run away from them. unless we are going to choose to say that these people whose rights have been violated are not Ugandans, they are. And travel bans in themselves do not just apply to you not having a visa to go. It extends to immediate family. It extends to any dealings and business that you may have with the US as a territory. And in this case, I think the motivation behind these actions is really grounded on accountability. Because even within our own legal framework, we have provisions for accountability for individuals who have perpetrated human rights or undermined democracy in this country. Which, if we had a transparent and accountable system, and if we had a working justice system, no state would perhaps see the need to intervene in our affairs as a country. Our own systems have failed us, and that is no secret. It is public knowledge. Our own justice system, our own protection mechanisms within this country are going down the steep. There are very few Ugandans that trust the system to protect and enforce the rights that are enshrined in their own laws. We have seen a blatant, violation of our own rights and the inability of our systems to protect and promote the rights of Ugandans. So in this case, these actions are a form of accountability. And trust me, even if we want to be dismissive of the impact of this pronouncement, the impact is dire. Both for individuals, but it could also extend beyond. And I also want to just say something that when sanctions, at whatever level they manifest, are being issued, there are reasons for that. One of it, which will be relevant in this context, is to signal the rest of the world that there's a problem. Sometimes it is not about really the ability of the US perhaps to come and launch a war, a fully fledged war in Uganda, but it is a signal to other actors that enjoy the same level of relationships with Uganda that there is a problem in that country. And just the US making this public statement in itself attracts a lot of attention and questions with regards to the human rights situation in Uganda. And that is not good for the country, because Uganda, as a country that enjoys a very good relationship with different states, would like to protect its name and uphold the principles against which the foundations of our country is laid. And it would like to be seen as a country that takes the interests of its own citizens at heart. So having something like this happening should be of concern to me and you, because we are Ugandans. And because our country should not be looked at that way. Our country is supposed to be a democratic state. Yeah.
I think maybe to Maurice, this has constantly come up, and the government is really downplaying it. It's a statement that came out, yeah, and it is a known statement by literally everyone out there. Why is it that a sanction like visa restriction is downplayed, yet this could really affect Uganda's standings abroad?
Well, like I mentioned, Uganda can also decide to sanction certain, businessmen from United States or anywhere, or government officials. So it is the right of United States to conduct their business the way they want, just like my brother Rugyendo, is mentioning. They can choose as a sovereign to say, Demian, you cannot come into our shores, or if you are doing a financial transaction that uses a certain intermediary bank in the United States, you may not do it. But in real democratic practice, and this is why there is a problem with some of these global US operations, where they do things unilaterally, torpedoing the international system, which is the UN. Because if they had issues in their pursuit of global evangelization for democracy, because that's how they position themselves in the world, then they could have gone to the UN and say, in terms of the values of democracy, we believe that in Uganda, in Yemen, where they actually have even more dire problems, in Iraq, in Libya, where they did an intervention that has created more problems than, the problems that happen to be there, and Gaddafi and other places. They could have said, the UN, where we are all equal partners as sovereigns, we believe that there is a problem in Uganda. And Uganda would be given an opportunity to actually defend itself and say, well, the US heard of these real things or rumors, and they are presenting them and they are recommending certain actions. But as Uganda, this is A, B, C, D. And then the nation states within the UN system, equal powers. I would not want this in the UN Security Council because you have the club of the domineering forces in the world. But within the UN system, then this would be debated. So the statement that I actually take seriously is the one that was debated by the European Parliament, where different actors and nation state voted. Of course, I blame our diplomatic corps for, first of all, not being able to detect that, not having the knowledge that it was going on, and also providing concrete information that would have been used as a basis of debate within the EU Parliament. I don't want to say that we should downplay these restrictions, because Uganda is a nation state within a global system. We do businesses, we do investments, we have partnerships in global security. Where US created problems and failed to solve them in Somalia, we did. We are responsible for normalization in South Sudan. We are a host of millions of refugees through our Pan-African agenda, but also the Ubuntu approach. As a country, we have done really a lot of work in promotion of peace building, human rights within the region. Where there could have been mistakes, either by individuals, they could be sanctioned. But make no mistake, sanctioning some officials who are conducting state business is not just a visa restriction. It means that actually you are trying to cripple. Because you see, economics and progress is a consequence of decisions. These could be economic decisions, they could be security decisions. So if you sanction people in charge of those decisions, you are actually crippling the country and crippling its citizens. So this dichotomy that my brother Joseph and perhaps to some extent Masa are trying to create, that you see it some individuals and their families, but if they are in charge of decisions, you are actually impacting, the economics, the welfare, the life of a woman in Amadat or a young man in Chisoro. So these are very serious matters, and they should be able to mobilize Ugandans against some of these domineering and creating quislings and puppets in this country.
Precisely why?
Let me get to Morison. You get there.
This is fantastic stuff. Morison. I think New Vision now has a new CEO. No, this government should actually find a very good space for you. And promote and make sure that you're really up down there. As CEO for East Massive Communication, you do a fantastic job for it. But look, clearly, to suggest, look, I was being very kind and very fair in this debate today. In fact, I really was sparing this regime, particularly because I know the people involved are citizens of my country, and I love my country and I love my citizens 100%, all of them, including Mr. Museveni.
It's not a regime, it's an administration.
It's a regime. Look, I had when I attempted to give a historical context of sanctions, including South Africa, when I attempted to bring around the contradictions and the hypocrisy of global systems, including America and Britain, when it came to apartheid in South Africa, where all of us, including U.P.C governments, were demanding for sanctions against South Africa. And I was one of those guys several times walking the streets of London demanding for sanctions against apartheid South Africa. And Margaret Thatcher and then Ronald Reagan at the time were claiming these sanctions would impact on the citizens. No, I have sufficient global experience and a bit of life to recognize that sanctions generally will impact beyond the confines. Yeah. I was being very diplomatic by suggesting that to the extent that a regime like this one that has been sustained by the US for over 34 years, reaches a stage in which, beyond diplomatic bag, individuals are targeted through the softer element of sanctions, shows there's something wrong. So Mr. Museveni and your team, wake up to the reality. Look, these are sanctions directly as a result, in part, to the death of up to 54 citizens of this country, our citizens. You know, those people have families, those people got friends, those are my citizens, those are our people. Directly as a result of people disappearing, and the state comes at them and say, we don't know whether they're in the police cells or the other new NRA specialized security system that we don't know in their cell, but they're there. Or after 1 month, we don't know whether they're 50, they're basically being kept there for safety. You know, these are our citizens, this is what we're talking about. To the extent, therefore, that Mr. Museveni's friends recognize that they need to be a bit of mini stick and carrot. Let's do the soft one. I think actually they've done this government, this regime, a very good favor. And I think you're right, that the next phase might be much more open, direct, and possibly slightly much more targeted sanctions. And the next stage might actually be, Morison, don't pray for it because I don't like it, might be a situation in which the US goes to the UN, the US persuades the EU allies, the US instructs their big baby Britain to consider Commonwealth sanctions against Uganda. And there we shall be talking terrible issues. And we don't want those things.
Yeah, right there. You see, we're talking about US coming in, but behind there, US is empowering this same, so the security. We have high.
That's huge hypocrisy. Yeah, huge hypocrisy. Yeah.
Yes.
And
what are we trying to talk about here?
You know, because what I was trying to say, they're trying to basically chastise their little boy. That look, you know, you're doing too much. 54 lives is lives too much. Please don't do it. It's common sense. And to that, we must thank the US. And to suggest that because the US are saying it this time around, do you know, talk about the media? William Pike had the job of New Vision for over 20 years. The only reason, Rugyendo, the only reason why William Pike did that was because he was amongst these PR guys, for these NRA guys, with the BBC and others, to sustain Mr. Museveni. So we can't pick and choose when we like it. We know these things. We are saying we want Uganda to go forward. Surely you enjoyed and dined with these guys whenever it's convenient. And by the way, I have ever been part of those patients who go and issue petitions to expose human rights abuse in this country, you know, and I get responses from these governments. This stage of sanctions or suggested visa restrictions is an advanced stage. And if I'm advising this regime, free advice, wake up, your friends are substantially uncomfortable. We do not want them to go beyond this because you are our fellow citizens. But you know what? The citizens who have died, the citizens who continue to suffer, they're our citizens with things unacceptable, particularly in the year 2021. Whatever's happened in this country, where somebody comes as a head of state or a spokesperson of government and dismisses the death and suffering of the citizens of this country, is completely unacceptable. And it's absolutely the responsibility of the East African community, that Mr. Museveni is a grandfather to, the African Union, that the Mr. Museveni is basically go to the club to sleep, and then actually the UN that sometimes does not do enough because they get instruction from London and Washington. That Washington has suggested, young man, you know, keep calm, you know, we need to take note of it. We don't really need it to go down there because when it gets there, people really suffer like people suffered in Zimbabwe. And you know what? When America bombed Libya in 1986, I was a student in Makerere University. I was amongst the lead organizers to go out in the streets of Kampala. Those days we were still allowed to go out in the streets of Kampala. Do you know what? That same Libya is Muammar Gaddafi, who had sustained Idi Amin in this country, torturing our people. That is only convenient once in a while for Mr. Museveni to talk about it. So no, we, and for me, from a U.P.C perspective, and just Ochieno, most of the citizens of this country are very reasonable. We know when to support. We know when not to support. Globally, we recognize America will do place, but when it talks about Iran and Iraq, it's of course the battle for oil. You know, we simply say, no, they were chasing strategic U.S. interests. For this other one, the U.S. is simply saying that those Ugandans who are dying, they're also lives. Wake up, Ugandans.
Precisely. I just wanted to add something very small.
Okay.
I don't want to lose it because it has to do with the points that they have made. That one of the motivations behind sanctions, I mentioned one before, is deterrent, is to tell you to stop, is to warn you, to say you're having an upper hand. You need to stop here. And that's why I specifically emphasized that there there are stages to sanctions. And US indeed, as he alluded to, is being very protective of their relationship with Uganda by starting from this level. And a sane government would be concerned with something like this, not dismissive, not to say that the US is intruding in our affairs, because the very affairs that are being discussed, for example, in that statement, we had the issue of civil society, the shrinking civic space. We had the issue of, the deaths at the protests. We had the arrests of opposition politicians. We had, irregularities with the electoral process. These are things that are not new. These are debates that Ugandans are having in every social media space. The disappearances are not a secret. They're evident. They are nothing to hide from. And they're saying, look, this is the situation. So what a good state and a reasonable state would do is to be accountable to its citizens, to say we are also concerned about the situation and we're trying to rectify. But what is rather shocking for me is the fact that the state can say they do not even know what's happening. And then when other actors step in, you are interfering in our affairs. Sovereignty is not just about your territory, it's about the people. And these people have spoken and they are not heard, and there's somebody willing to listen to them. And I don't think the US even needs an opposition leader to tell them what's happening in Uganda. It is there in the public domain. They don't even need civil society.
You have rigged out Rugyendo.
Let me get there.
They have rigged
This sanction comes after just this is the 2020 report.
Yes.
The US 2020
Human
report.
rights
Now
report, yes.
downplaying this call. Do you think would have their consequences in the
But you
future?
see, I don't think
From this
anyone
evidence.
has downplayed this, by the way. I don't think so. What is happening is the methodology. The problem is the methodology. That there was no. You see, if I'm your friend and you have something against me, why do you go to the bar? Why don't you first ask me and then
had those
a discussion?
conversations.
They did not have them.
You've seen
They just wake up. You see, the United States, some country called the US, just woke up and decided to issue orders.
Interesting.
Yes, because yes, because that's the point. That's
The
the
way you're
point.
sounding reminds me
and
of
You have not seen
Nobert
meetings
Mao.
between the US and the president.
Yes,
the
you see,
EU,
meetings,
and about
certainly,
the human rights
certainly,
situation.
meetings could have happened.
happened.
I know that,
They
but
have.
you see,
They
by the
have.
time
They
you go, you come open, and then this problem, the meetings broke down.
Yes.
Yeah.
There was a disagreement,
Precisely.
and you see, none of us has heard the side of the state. What was actually happening? Are these proper human rights
Then
abuses?
it's their
There was-
responsibility to come out and
explain.
tell us because they're accountable to us. And that's an important point you make.
The point I'm making
Important
is,
point you make.
they made the point that the country was under insurrectionists, and it is clear people were planning violence. People were planning all sorts of
Well,
things.
deliberate.
Yes, all sorts of things, and of course, while executing the process, mistakes were made, and I have seen ministers, I have seen government, state officials come out and
Apologize.
and apologize, including the president, including the chief of the defense forces. I am a citizen. I'm not a government. I'm not really, but I would imagine, I would agree with Mase that yes, this is a wake-up call, and I would want to appeal that probably a discussion, ensues to be able to understand and contextualize these concerns from our friends. However, for me, what concerns me most now is that when you say that our justice system has collapsed, that our civic space has collapsed, we are here.
Shrunk.
Yes,
It
has
has
shrunk.
shrunk.
But we are here.
That's why we're here.
We are here discussing the other day.
We can't
We are in the civic space
discussion
discussing the same
anywhere.
problem. I think sometimes the civil society really escalates some of the things for nothing, in my view, because. I think Uganda really, the discussion is
But I
open.
think this didn't come from the
It's
civil
open,
society.
really.
It came from political players, the people that
Who are hiding? Who are hiding under
in
civil?
the election.
Who are hiding? Who are hiding
The
under
issue.
civil society?
It's about
But
the
the
issue.
issue. You see, the point I wanted to make here is that when you say the judicial system has collapsed, I want to see people like you and others really come up and say, you IGP, we are taking you to court, we are taking you on. I've not seen these processes from the civil society and even people who are concerned about these kinds of individuals. What we have is probably some intelligence-based investigation about certain individuals whom the US doesn't want to tell us. Because you cannot now accuse the state of having failed to take certain individuals to bring them to account. Who are these individuals? Where is the complainant? That's for me.
You're not suggesting that the burden of responsibility should lie with us to take the police to court because some citizens have died.
I have seen.
When we employ these police and the state will act on our behalf.
And even when the president,
let me finish my point. Let me finish my point. I have seen the state, this administration, sanction certain individuals. It has sanctioned certain individuals. You know, people have made mistakes during operations. They've been taken to court.
Those have happened.
Yes, those have happened. Yes, those have happened.
Very few.
So for me, I'm thinking, you know, was there any mechanism where there was that discussion and say, Mr. Museveni, we know we have so and so, we have Joseph, who is the IGP, we have Mase, who is the head of the CID. You know, we have these investigations. Please take action. And Museveni has refused. I have don't see
maybe if the sanction could have been that.
For me, why am I concerned? And I'm not being dismissive, my sister. I'm not being
dismissing the discussion.
I'm not being dismissive in my. You know, I'm a strange Pan-Africanist. I abhor this.
Strange.
I abhor this whole nonsense about internationalization, where people assume to be the international system, and then they overload it everyone. I expect, you know, mutual respect, and this is why you think I'm dismissive. I'm not being dismissive. I think what we call a jogo is what is happening in this particular case. You don't sit in Washington and then tell the whole world how the other friend of yours is this dirty. You know, we don't do that even in African culture. We discuss where are the diplomatic instruments? What is happening? What's the discussion between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the State Department?
Unfortunately, that's exactly what this government did and does when it's convenient to it.
Yes. That's all. So
let's have a short break. Let's have a short break and return. Yeah.
No, but I wanted to give a point of information.
But after the break, we'll start from there. And when we get back from the break, we need to get deep and see whether these sanctions are actually effective, and possibly if they will change the behavior of what is happening around our human rights arrangements and violations. Let's have a short break and get back. Thank you very much.
The Citizens Chatroom happens every Friday at 2 p.m. on Civic Space TV Online on Facebook and YouTube. We invite you to be part of this conversation. Civic Space TV, freedom always.
Welcome back from the short break. This is the Citizens Chatroom, and we're on the Citizens Chat Show. Kindly follow this conversation on our Twitter hashtag #ChatShowUG. The debate is ongoing live on YouTube channel, our YouTube channel, Civic Space TV, live on Facebook, and live on all our social media pages, including Instagram. Kindly follow the discussion, follow the conversation. Place your comments there. Let's get to know what you're saying. Let's get to know what you have in mind with us. So we ended this debate from the break, and we needed to dig deeper. And Morison, welcome. And you had the last segment of it, but before then, I'll need to welcome Sarah. From she was off in the first segment, and you're back now. You had to fix time for the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Demian, and good afternoon, viewers.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So right there, Morison.
There's a point of information, which I had. Because
but before that point of information, can you also tell us, do the sanctions? Shall we see some change of conduct after if this continues in this way from the perpetrators?
I think that would be more a consequence of citizen action or the act of citizenship in this country to hold their government accountable, to improve state capacity to deal with complex issues of political management. Because I believe once you have a ratio of one policeman to over 50,000, That's for me an issue of state capacity, some gaps, so which must be improved. And I think that, you know, we shouldn't look to the US or Great Britain or Russia or South Africa or Kenya to be able to fix our state capacity. I think it is citizens who should, you know, take responsibility, organize, put pressure on the system to make sure that it serves them effectively. But I wanted to get back to what my brother Joseph and my sister Mercy tried to kind of, you know, bring as a basis for what you now call targeted visa sanctions, and a lot of the things that you say. But let me again first be very, very clear that there is no citizen, in my view, who should die, who should be tortured, who should be kidnapped in this country or in any other country. And for the 54 people who died, like I've already said before, may their souls rest inside the gates of heaven and peace, and never again. But to suggest that those who we lost during the previous elections and even before was a consequence of a state-sanctioned agenda, I think that's hyperbole, if you will. And I think what we should be demanding for as citizens is that whoever individually, because there should be individual liability, we should see actions in terms of proper investigations, what happened, what went wrong, who is responsible. But also in that process, really, and this is why I've always said that as Ugandans, beyond those who wield the state power, we should again look at ourselves. Are we becoming intolerant? Are we becoming really violent? Because I remember, for example, when Dr. Chiza Besigye, the former president of the FDC, was visiting Bulange. So you had a group that was calling itself People Power stoning Chiza Besigye because they thought that he was blocking their man because they had suspected that he had intentions of running. So you can imagine that. When the Honorable Nabila was visiting the FDC offices, trying to say, I need to be nominated, you know, to run for mayor, some people at FDC, you know, ransacked and tagged, if you will, Honorable Nabila. So that state of violence is really unacceptable. Even during those Kampala riots, you know, that followed the arrest of the Honorable Chagulanyi, you know, you had, you know, women being undressed, a policewoman being dragged, some people being beaten just because they were putting on yellow T-shirts, so they were presumed to support the national resistance movement. So I think in all that, the point I'm trying to make is that we need to put a mirror as Ugandans and look at ourselves and say, have we become intolerant of each other? No matter which political party you support, but across all these formations. But then Rugyendo or team, is also called a team, mentioned something that was interesting. Because you see, when you look at the transgressions that we've had during the elections, you don't have to look at it from an event perspective. You have to look at the journey map in terms of how did we reach here. You look at a trend line and whether always catapult if you are doing a graph and look at it and say, what is it that has been going on? When you hear a team talking about insurrectionists, what does he mean? And if you look at it, there is a heart of danger that has been going on. Not a sacred heart, a heart of danger. The killing of Muslims, okay? The Muslims and then the shootings. The killing of, you know, policemen. You remember the late Kawesi, then there was this other, Kirumera, the policeman, and other unexplained. So you want to, perhaps the state knows more than some of us know, but if you have to look at the summation of all that, at that trend line, you ask yourself what is going on. This is why I was telling my friend, I think, Rwongwea, the Secretary General of NUP and others, that perhaps some dangerous groups wanted to use your civil peaceful actions, to either cause regime change, because even these people who operate, ulterior interests, look at certain situations and they want to utilize it to actually pursue, ulterior motives that are unconstitutional. So we should look at all this with really clear and proper analysis, and don't rush apportion blame with no full, rounded picture of what the hell is going on here.
Thank you very much, Morison. Right there, I would want to invite Sarah. First, you're going to weigh in with what Morison has said, but also I want you to first, I need to ask you, do you think the sanctions will remarkably really alter the political environment in Uganda? Around here, but also the image of the country abroad?
Yeah, thank you, Damien. Maybe if I may start from where Morison has stopped. They talk about rebels, insurgents, civil wars in Uganda is not new. We have had turbulence right from our independence, and the preamble of the Constitution is very clear in recognition of our history and the turbulent political history of this country. But recently, let me state what I witnessed as a youth, was the war in the north, where I was an emerging youth activist. There were regular updates in Parliament about the war in the north, including deployments, statements by Minister of Defense. The Committee on Defense and Internal Affairs would regularly interact with our security architecture on the war in the north, the victims, the kidnapped children. We had the situation of children, coming to sleep on the roads. All details were managed through our parliament, through our media, in essential capacity. And I think that was a greater threat, because that war carried on for 20 years. Away from that, we had the elements of the People's Redemption Army in 2001, also emerging from a contested election. Our government was very clear. They made a statement in Parliament saying, this is information we have gathered as security. There are people planning to destabilize this country. They are supported by Rwanda. It is a statement on the answered in this Parliament, and that's the time Rwanda was mentioned before elections as an enemy country, and all political actors were prohibited in 2001 from getting funding or being seen to collaborate with Rwanda, because it was a record in Parliament. What has then changed? Because this is what the Constitution demands. What has then changed? That for close to 2 years, we have talk of insurgency, and there is no official statement in Parliament about this so-called insurgency. I know yesterday there was heated debate in Parliament on attempts to increase the security budget to 7 trillion. Yeah. And the minister was giving the same excuse of insurgency. But there is no record of the so-called insurgency. Civil society have been victims of this so-called talk on insurgency. Colleagues were offices of our colleagues were closed, that they are linked to the insurgency. Accounts frozen. We had a meeting as civil society leaders and said, no, you never know what your colleagues are doing. You never know people's hearts. Maybe, because we thought terrorism was a serious allegation. So we said, you never know, maybe the state could have information. Let's give them time. We gave them 3 months. 3 good months. No arrest, no investigation, nothing. The NGOs moved to court and sued the government. We thought because that was blackmail. So when the NGOs sued the government came in the secret of the dark and reopened the accounts. No investigation, nothing. So I think it becomes really difficult. As citizens, you want to believe that you have professional people in charge of security. You want to believe that your country has capacity to safeguard the citizens as well as the territorial integrity of our country. And you want to believe that the people committed to protecting Uganda and Ugandans have no malicious intentions, cannot carelessly say things they don't mean, and we have an effective intelligence gathering architecture. Because you don't expect security experts to make such careless statements, because they have far-reaching impact. So it becomes difficult then, given that background, to believe the talk of instability, of insurgency, with no statements in Parliament as per the demands of our Constitution. If there are security threats on this country, about the people, about the territorial integrity of this country, why can't the Minister of Defense do what is required of him and make an official statement in Parliament so that citizens are informed of the threats facing our country in official capacity? Why does it remain bar talk and conversation that there are insurgents in this country? Away from that, the role of sanctions, and I'm sure you've gone through the background, and the role of the international community in fighting impunity and unbecoming behavior, with the genesis of Magna Carta rules, the evolution of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the Declaration on the Universality of Rights, which takes away human rights issues being a monopoly of domestic policy and sovereignty talk, and makes them universal, global, including a characterization of crimes against humanity that are committed against the whole world. So given that sanctions are the only way in which states check each other, both in relation, sanctions are not just on human rights. They serve the aspect of even preventing states' threats. For example, if we have, our relations with Rwanda are not yet normalized. If it became apparent, for example, that Rwanda wants to attack Uganda or the other way around, each of these countries can go to international community and make a statement with evidence, and then sanctions are issued against that aggressive country. And they are blacklisted, because sanctions is a form of blacklist. And that would prevent such aggressiveness against states. We have other protocols on mutual aggressiveness and arrest, but limiting ourselves to the sanctions and the travel sanctions faced with the country. Yes, sanctions have impact in checking impunity, checking unacceptable behavior. And it's good that the progression of sanctions has moved from countries, because when you sanction a country, you are punishing innocent citizens and innocent people that have done nothing wrong. But individual sanctions are good to the extent that they punish those particular individuals that are abusing the laws of their land, abusing the rights of the citizens as global citizens, and violating the normal accepted standards of democracy and governance. So when these individuals are sanctioned, they are clearly blacklisted. It is not just about visiting America. I'm sure other sanctions are coming. Other sanctions are coming, but to me, the most important thing is the response of the state. The state is in denial on crimes that we have all witnessed as citizens. I think really, to me, we should accept where things have gone wrong and commit to correct them.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And while we're having a conversation, we even through the break, we talked about future sanctions coming out of if this is not really this is not attention to.
But these are not sanctions. There are no sanctions in Uganda.
On individuals.
There are no sanctions.
There
There
are
are restrictions.
There are proper sanctions. There are visa sanctions.
Okay, let's
There are form of sanctions.
this is a question to Ochieno.
Yeah.
What do you think government can what actions can government take to restore normal relations with their allies?
Just to say that my two brethren are fantastic guys, but having these two ladies is just extraordinary. And Sarah is just embedded in as if she knew some of the early conversation. And thanks very much to those two legal minds. Because Sarah makes it very, very precise in addition to in terms of the context of the conversation. And so your question is what government should do to restore these. Sarah's advised them, I instructed them to basically simply calm. And all of us actually, now this is a secret, during break, we all seemingly agreed to the extent that our producers and everybody else was saying they were fantastic because we agreed on everything. So it's actually possible as a nation, I'm not going to context of detail, but really to simply say that when you actually have a civil conversation,
Those are
it's
in-house
not
How did I miss that?
this nation.
That's U.P.C. style.
Oh yes, of course, yes. U.P.C. Yeah, we founded and protect this nation state. So we simply say this country is possible when we actually have a conversation like this. And so we are advising our guys in government that just have some sense of humility. Recognize that things have gone wrong. Acknowledge and take responsibility. And I think it was Mercy earlier saying, in terms of the missing links, which is basically what they needed to do, wouldn't have arrived at where we are, was that, look, okay, we know that certain individuals, if you claim that it was not state policy, certain individuals did certain things, including, ending the lives of citizens of this country. What are you doing about it? Sarah said, 3 months, nothing was happening. 3 months, we're in denial. On 3 months, we're boasting about loss of lives. So no, I think government should really come out, one, to apologize to the citizens of Uganda, two, look into the eyes of the families of those people who are bereaved and those people who are missing and those people who suffered, and actually present a responsible parent figure. Then look into the country and simply say that, well, they've done us a huge disfavor by putting the name of our country onto the global map for a wrong reason. They need to do that. And then go to our other friends and tell them that, look, we will not do it again. America provides over $1 billion dollars to this country every year, and some individuals who take peanut change out of those ones every month come out to your screens and television and claim, oh, we don't care. That's actually a lie. So we need to be able to do that and simply say that, well, we are part of the international community. I know Mr. Museveni once talked about the early part of the war in the north, said that he never had or never read about Geneva Conventions, as Geneva Convention on Human Rights. But that was then. So we hope all of us have now learned lessons that we're part of the international community, and so it is actually possible for us to be able to move forward. And simply say that, look, things went wrong, we will not simply do it again. Earlier, I think, towards the last segment of the other conversation, or was it during break when there was conversation around civic space, again, it was a bit of a mini joke. We are saying that it is actually possible for the democratic space in this country to be opened up, liberalized. It is possible for the civil society to be allowed to do their basic jobs. It is possible for this country, this government, to show and prove that they're open and tolerant. And it's possible for us to have a conversation that, like Sarah said, if somebody does something wrong, in force, I think the last time I was a guest in this program, we were with the police officers, and one of the things we were trying to talk about is simply, look, if certain things go wrong, empower and enable the police forces as the main, a law enforcement agency to do their jobs. And that's basically really what we are asking. And this panel here, we are very modest, we are very generous, and we're very reasonable panel. And I believe that we are representative of the state, meaning most citizens of this country are very kind and very forgiving. It is possible for us to really take only that, Demian, and we'll be moving forward as a new nation.
Okay, thank you very much, Ochieno. Let me get to Rugyendo. I want to team, Bishop. Yeah. I want to ask, do you think that really our image out there has deteriorated? And if not, or if so, do you think there's the actions that government should take to really work well with these allies?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I want to agree with Joseph, my brother Joseph, really put it, that's fantastic. You see, if you want to run a state in a modern way, there are certain things you must do, especially that border on basic decency, basic Ubuntu, to come out and say, we need a discussion on this, it takes two to tango, also the other side also has issues. We can have a meeting point and then build a country together. So yes, I think there is the image of this country really has taken a battering, I would say. Imagine, from a journalistic point of view, and for so many reasons, not even just politics, but for sheer lack of proactive engagement, even by the state. I was watching a show somewhere where my brother here was a panelist. I don't remember where it was, Morison, but he was sort of talking about what our missions are doing abroad, and are not able really to come out. There are many Ugandans during this election and even before. I was interacting with a number of Ugandans abroad, Europe, US. Many of them had issues to do with consular services, just basic consular services. They don't know where their missions are. They don't know. There's no communication going on, really serious communication at the international level. By the time civil society and even the opposition occupies, especially at the national level, it means there's been a failure in communication. And I've really personally brought it up to them, and I said, honestly speaking, come out, explain some of the things. If you say, no, I don't know communication really. I don't think so. But I think they've taken certain things for granted, in my view. They've taken certain things for granted, and maybe, in my view, what needs to be done is that I think this country needs, this government especially, needs probably a new communication strategy that takes care of issues like the ones you're raising, where everybody is involved, where you have a mechanism to discuss even with somebody you don't agree with. And that discussion is a discussion that builds towards something that's national interest. Thank you very much. National interest, national stability. There's no agreement on what is the national interest. There's no agreement on what's national stability.
We don't even have national values.
So those are the issues, and these conversations really have broken down. And even before you build the image, by the way, you don't need to first of all paint your house on the outside. People say this house is nice. Go inside, come inside. How do we communicate? How do we deal with each other? Am I able, for example, if I'm noob, am I able to really sit down with somebody from NRM and we have a conversation? It's not yet possible in this country. So this sort of is a lot of, I would say, even on the part of the state, it's a kind of arrogance that sometimes you can't understand, and which shuts out certain people from a discussion, and we fail to listen to each other. I used to enjoy the NRM of 86 to about 96, where they used
intellectual discourse.
Intellectual discourse. They used to come to Makerere University, and then that's when I used to see people like Mayombo and Mushega, openly engaging with the themes here, and it would basically purely be intellectual. And at the end of the day, some conversation has gone on, some wooing has happened, and there's much more. But now people don't speak. Somebody speaks. Either they close your newspaper, or they close your office, like my sister here, and that builds anger and creates walls between ourselves. And when that explodes outside, then the image goes down. So I'm thinking this so-called sanction really should I think wake up people who are in the civil society space to ignite a conversation, a national conversation, and people power out, people discuss and put pressure on some of the systems to work and be seen to be doing something about some of these things. Yeah. And that's how we shall heal the country. Once you have a country that is healed, that is healthy, then you have no problem with its international image.
Thank you very much, Jen. Master, would you want to weigh in there? But also how really what government can do to ensure that the ordinary citizens really don't suffer at the end of the day.
I think my brothers have articulated this very well, and I just want to pick up on something I said earlier about the systems failing the citizens. And I remember I came under heat because how can I say that the systems are failing people? And when my brother here was articulating the issues of insurgency in the country and subversive activities in the country, I asked myself, if citizens don't feel safe in their country, and our government does not know who is doing what and what is happening in the country, I have every reason to believe our systems have collapsed. Because indeed, if the state does not know who is kidnapping citizens, if the state does not know who is killing citizens, if we cannot see people being reprimanded for their actions, then I have every reason to believe so. So we need to restore the confidence of the citizens in the systems, that these systems are designed to protect them, that these systems are meant for the enforcement of their rights. And there has to be nothing wrong with that. Even when we spoke about, for example, the deaths during the protests, and he clearly articulated the issues, the women that were addressed, and all of these issues, I asked myself, the head of state in his address clearly admitted to certain actions in this country, including killings on national TV. But what we are yet to see is the people who did this being brought to book or being held accountable, because these admissions came from him. And then it really shocks me when other actors within the same state come out and deny the occurrence of things that are happening in the country. If you tell me they've not been kidnaps, and yet certain media houses have been documenting events, and they have very clear documentation of what has been happening, and you are unable to bring these perpetrators to book, then citizens lose confidence, not just in the system, but also in their own government. So I think the government has a lot of work to do to restore confidence of the citizens in the system, but also in governance. Because if we have confidence in our state, then we will not be afraid to speak about the issues that affect us. We will not be afraid to sit and have a conversation, intellectual conversation like the one we're having now, regardless of whether we agree or not. And I think for me that is a huge issue. When citizens jubilated over these sanctions, for me I was concerned. Because trust me, if these sanctions were baseless, if there were no reasons for them, if citizens had reason to doubt why the US would issue individual sanctions on certain citizens of Uganda, they would be the first up in arms, challenging these actions. They would actually be questioning the US's interest in Uganda. But the fact that citizens seem to agree with this action and they're actually jubilating about it without weighing the implication, that means that there's a problem. That means that there's something we must interrogate. That means there is something that citizens understand beyond these sanctions, and they are looking for a solution, which they start to find outside of this country. So we need to restore that confidence, and it starts by the things that my brothers here have articulated that I will not go back into, and it also starts by opening up the civic space. Let people have these conversations. Let people feel free to challenge what they feel is a violation of their rights, because that is why we have laws. And I always say, if we're not ready to enforce the laws that we put in place, then we must just declare that we're not a democratic country, that we're a militant state, and we'll just know that we're now operating a lawless country. But we cannot say we have laws and we're not enforcing them, and we're not allowing citizens to enjoy their freedoms, which are enshrined within very well-known laws that are here in this country. We have systems that are supposed to enforce those laws. So if I cannot express myself in peace, then that means I'm in a state of lawlessness. So we need to get back to those basics and restore citizen confidence in the governance of this country, but also in the systems that are meant to protect them.
Thank you very much, Mercy. But Sarah, while you were away in our first engagement, there was, I think Rugyendo talked of the sanctions. These are merely the kind of diplomatic, how did you call it?
Tools.
Diplomatic tools. So can you possibly try to tell us what other tools besides targeted sanctions could be used by international organs in cases of these human rights violations?
No, it's true, sanctions are part of the foreign policy instruments used to denounce unacceptable behavior. There are other far-reaching effects. And I don't blame people who say these are just travel restrictions, they are not sanctions. You know, the crisis, Masesa did talk about the unfortunate political context we find ourselves in, and riding from the background that we do not inherit nations from our fathers, but we hold them in custody of our children. If you look at the kind of country where we are players, because as we are seated here, we are all major players in this country, in different sectors. And the kind of country that we inherited a few years back, compared to that, yes.
The one.
The U.P.C.
The U.P.C. the last elected government. Fantastic. Thank you.
The one that gave us in the
No, the one we inherited.
And the one that we are likely to pass on to our children and our grandchildren. So, to me, I think that the citizens are apathetic on the barriers of access to justice in this country. We have fantastic laws, including the Human Rights Enforcement Act, where such errant officers can be held accountable. Without mentioning, the crisis we went through when journalists were assaulted by the military police, we did have a conversation as the broader civil society on whether to proceed against the Human Rights Enforcement Act. And we found that we had no litigants or witnesses because the victims could not stand the repercussions. Some of them could not withstand the likely repercussions from dragging generals to courts of law. Because you will go disappearing in the night. You will not have your day in court. The threats around access to justice and growing impunity. As actors involved in public interest litigation, on several occasions to protect the Constitution, and that includes the fundamental rights and freedoms. On several accounts, we do not have...
Morison will say that's subversion.
Yeah, no. We do not have litigants. We do not have witnesses on the violations that happen in this country. And you find you cannot proceed. Because you yourself, you are not a victim, but you are a public defender. And you cannot stand as a witness. You need a witness account in some of these cases. Yes, I see Morison asking. Morison, when journalists are beaten, I'm not the one beaten. I need a statement of a victim. Even in public interest litigation. I know I can proceed broadly under Article 50, but it is not as much evidence. On several accounts, judges have asked us, what is the public? Because for you are an organization. You say you are here in public interest. What is the public?
Because you're not elected.
No. It's not a question of being elected, my brother. It's not a question of being elected. The Constitution is very clear on mandate of civil society. It's not that all mandate is elective mandate. Elective mandate is part of the mandate and architecture of our society. You are in private sector. Are you saying you don't have mandate over private sector issues?
I think
because you are not elected?
Well, the private sector is essentially selfish. So we have self issues, and unless we have.
Let me take information.
Yeah, because you had actually rigged me out. I needed to speak. I don't know why you did that. But let me first of all say that public interest law in this country allows broader. You don't have to really have witnesses and other people sign for you to pursue a public interest matter.
We have several cases that have collapsed because of that.
It depends on the legal team that you hire to be able to understand how you can move a public interest issue, because remember, some of us are in court to ensure that people get their benefits. So there is another way where, because remember, we still have a big job, me and you and everyone, of raising civic consciousness into organizing tenacity to get our citizens really to take some of these public matters beyond their mere law aspects to build a greater society. That is work that we should be involved in on a daily basis, and me and Sarah agree that we are not yet there. And that's why the Constitution provides that other channel where even when you don't have people signing for fear of imagined and real related issues, you can still proceed in court and win. If you can look at some of the cases won by a court, like, that of Tamara Forest Regazettement, which is a civil society, it's not that people had to sign, but they pursued a public interest matter following a certain legal regime that Sarah understands very well. So I don't want you to, use that other channel.
Morison, that's one way. If I may take your submission as information, and I conclude.
No. Okay, you conclude because you had.
Yes, I concluded
you had
you come
read before,
in.
yeah.
No. I think it's not rigging. Because I understand what you were saying, Morison. But we have several judgments. We got court. I don't know how many cases CCG has in court. There are more than 10. So it's not that, because public interest litigation is part of our objectives as a constitutional watchdog. Yeah, because how do you protect the constitution? Without litigation, you cannot. So we got court, and I know the aspect you're talking of. But we have many cases where the judge says, of course in public interest litigation, proceeding under Article 50, protection of fundamental rights and freedoms, you have to either be affected or you are defending an affected group of people.
Yeah.
So in a case where you are defending an affected group of people, normally the judgments ask, where are these people? We have several judgments where court rules, yes, you have a point, but you are here on behalf of the public. Where is the public? Including one case on health rights. In the Court of Appeal, where is the public? So it's not that what I'm talking about, I don't know it. We have, when you have a strong public interest litigation, and you have affidavits of victims, there are 90% chances that you will succeed. When I go alone and I have an affidavit at Center for Constitutional Governance and I'm the litigant, I could stand a 50% chance, but I do not automatically stand a 90% chance on violations where I'm not directly. And you are supposed to demonstrate as part of evidence on how you are affected. We lost the passport case on the same judgment. So we have like 3 judgments on that. Where is the public? Where are the affected people? Why don't you bring them on board?
We need to review the
Yeah.
Especially
So,
Article 50, really,
yes.
on rights.
You have to
on rights
demonstrate
enforcement,
the
you have to
impact.
Demonstrate.
But
Unlike
let me ask
the
you-
example of a forest,
Yeah.
where then the amount of evidence that you need is more broad in nature, because this is perhaps a conservation. So how you proceed in that matter is different
How are you
from when it's a human rights enforcement. You will have to have those affidavits.
Yes. So we have these limitations on access to justice. And with growing impunity, where there could be fears of repercussions on the people you are dragging to court, then sanctions become the only way out. Because these generals cannot threaten America. Whereas they can threaten the litigants in court, they cannot threaten the US.
So I think that's a very interesting.
I need yes.
Yes, because you see, whereas the United States has almost a $12 trillion GDP, but this nature of godfathering, I think dismembers our agency.
You're traumatizing me for a reason, but anyway.
Because it is actually what people are experiencing who are listening to us is really traumatizing their citizenship. As people who were born in Amdat, born in Nyimi Mokemso, born in Nagongera, born in Kabohe, born in Anaka, and all those places. Because as citizens we are born, equal in what they call
As citizens of the world.
as citizens of Uganda and the world.
Yes.
Really, we are all human and have different, contextualities.
Universal.
So to subject ourselves to godfathering, no one can talk to America. You cannot stop America. They give you how many billions? No. I think because it is. Because at the end of the day, we need to move as a people. And I've said about this narrative that some people are parroting, so let's use that word, weakens the civic agency in this country, weakens our progress towards really total independence, not just political one, but also the mind, and really looks at local solutions as ineffective and looks at solutions from abroad and some other groups that also have a lot of problems, but they have the way they package themselves in terms of how they imagine the world.
They should do that because
So
we rely on them. On
no, I need to make this point quite clearly, Demi, because I think it's a major problem, it's a major fault line on a conscience of the people. And it even, by the way, legitimizes those who are celebrating this. And I was telling you that if you look at countries where there have been unilateral illegal sanctions from the United States, if you look at Vienna Accords, because unilateral, it means they haven't passed through the UN system where other nations have the right to defend themselves, in a more fair process, is that in those countries, it has strengthened the governments there, the administrations there, what you like to call regimes, and disempowered the people, but also in most circumstances rallied the people to support those governments because there is an external force that is trying to come back and take over their self-determination related consciousness. That's really a big issue. Because when you look at it, because you look at who's celebrating these visa restrictions, then you wonder, are these guys, were they trying to be installed as quizzing and puppets of a foreign power? Or they actually wanted the real mandate, from the people? I think we should consciously think about it. The other aspect, the final aspect.
It is a report from these people
No,
that
not at all. They have all the eyes. Some of the eyes could be. So the final. Yes. So the final point.
Are you okay to take a question from Sarah?
No. The final. Because I want to make a final point because we are here really enjoying the civic space.
Yes.
On civic TV.
We have to accommodate Sarah.
Yes. In this country. And this is Uganda, anyway, where this fantastic debate happens.
Yes.
But Massey pointed to the issue of legitimacy, is their confidence and legitimacy in the government, because the government is different from the state. And, looking at what is really going on, we just had elections. And I can tell you, when people are tired of a political party or a government, whether it is in the central region or in the northern region or in the west or east, they will remove their trust through the vote and otherwise. When I look at the data sets, whatever other perceptions that people have, I think the NRM government still retains what you call meaningful legitimacy, and which really emerges from its ability to really protect our territorial boundaries, be able to defend the right to property, and meaningful level of peace in this country. That is core legitimacy. Two, recently we had this global problem, pandemic, COVID. And I'm happy that now vaccines are here. But when the chairman of the National Resistance Movement and the president of Uganda went on TV and said, we have an enemy that we are still trying to study. We are shutting down the country. Do A.B.C, what they call standard operate, is it? The operating, the SOPs,
Yes.
masks, social distance, and all these other things. Ugandans behaved. They said the president and the chairman of NRM has told us to do ABCD in a situation where people don't trust the state, don't trust the government. I can tell you, people would not behave.
I think people
followed
because of what was happening elsewhere. The death and what.
No. I can tell you, well,
But they would not have done it their own.
Okay, because you see, if you want me,
Enforcement, those
No,
serious
no, no, no.
enforcement.
But some
If you
also
want me-
are actually really.
if you want me to do a comparator with other countries and how they are faring in this COVID thing, I can do it. Because
Actually,
so you think Ugandans don't know what is happening
For
elsewhere?
example, Italy, they refused to listen. The
Yes,
Prime Minister
so-
was crying like a baby.
So there are certain facts that we may try to partisanly,
Okay,
throw aside.
you're building a very good case for me, so let me just wait patient.
Yes.
Thank you.
So do you see? So I think in terms of legitimacy, even when there are challenges, okay, I think Ugandans, and the majority of Ugandans at all levels, still have meaningful trust in the national resistance, movement. Then she said, Masesa said another, not disturbing, but a fairly, not discomfortable, but because she said, the state has no idea of the kidnaps, is it of the insurrections of what is going on. So when you try to, because me, I'm doing logic. I don't want to even know what other people say. I'm trying to logicize what's going on. Because I have seen some ministers speak and I've seen some ministers speak and I'm like, do these guys? Yes, but
you say something, just like you say, we have trust in the
This is
system.
a statement to the world.
You are protected. Let's
Okay.
Morison is
But you
protected.
have a command
What's that to say?
Thank you for protecting me, because me, I am here speaking as a citizen on Citizen TV.
Like all of us,
Hey, Uganda.
with an opinion about the power of the state. Okay, carry on.
My big question is Morison before
So-
he leaves.
No, because I wanted to finish this point.
Yeah, please finish.
The point I'm trying to make is that in management of security affairs, there is a certain point where the state can make a statement in parliament, and it can make that statement when it has reached the assurance in terms of intelligence, counterintelligence, reconnaissance, triangulation of information, and all these things. And they are, because they have a state retains that covert period where they are managing the situation,
So
where
dealing with the rumors.
where alarming the citizenry, is not necessarily, okay. So I believe that at the right time, okay.
They will now say that they know.
No, at the right time, a statement by the commander-in-chief,
Oh, I see.
okay,
Will
is
come.
going to be presented in parliament or in any other
on the
space
state of the nation.
that Sarah would be comfortable with. But try and quarterback.
So we need to be
No,
patient.
no,
All
no.
right.
Try and quarterback the state into giving us, non-ripened information.
So where are
Is
they
not
telling us?
is not
Why are
necessarily
they
okay.
telling us
So
now?
people put
That's my question.
Since
No, my
he has run
question.
away from it.
No, my
People
question.
who
Where I really want to
Eight.
know Morison's view. Morison, as you criticize and condemn the citizens, thinking that
How can I
sanctions.
condemn
No, wait. Thinking that sanctions can give them some bit of justice. Do you feel equally traumatized by the inaction of the state in holding errant soldiers and officers accountable
So
for
let-
the crimes they are committing?
So let me be very clear that I believe that some of the challenges we have are as a result of state capacity and some individuals. That's why we have that personal liability thing that we have really talked about. And I remember last time I gave you the example of Ndombasi from the DRC, who appeared in the International Court of Justice and said whatever he was doing. You remember that man Yerudi and Ndombasi, where he said whatever I did was because I was commanded to do so. And the conclusion at the time was that you committed these crimes individually, so we must hold you. And I remember, I think I was with Sarah, where I mentioned that those who commit certain crimes, trying to hold who do certain mistakes, and they hope the state is going to protect them, should actually be worried. So I do believe that as we build state capacity to be able to do some of the things. So we must make sure that individuals, so the state did not sanction some of these
Why doesn't it act?
some of these mistakes, and and it should act. And I believe that in some areas it has been acting. Whether it is acting at the speed, that we want, is really a subject of discussion. And Sarah, before you came, I was very clear that broadly sanctions impact citizens more than governments, and that unilateral US sanctions have led to suffering of 200 million people across the world. I gave numbers before you came. If you want, we can repeat it.
Just a quick question. Just 1 second. About citizen organizing, yes, on the impact, the question he asked earlier about the impact of this. How do you think in the current context in which we are, citizens are free to organize? Is the operating environment one that permits citizens to express themselves in the ways in which it is enshrined within our laws? Because if you say this takes away the legitimacy of the citizens, which citizens we know right now are not at liberty to organize how they would, because our political system has been criminalized.
So in 30 seconds, citizens should organize as long as when they're organizing, they don't impact on rights of other citizens. The other weekend, I was attending a big group organization of the Farmers Federation and other things. So clearly, people can protest. They have the right to protest. But if they are going to protest and also the routers join them and root, that's a problem. So in the last conversation we had here, we needed to find a balance between how can we protest, exercise our constitutional rights without hurting rights of those who are not joining certain, because causes are very many. They are workers, they are unionists, they are all these things. They should organize, they should protest, their voices should be heard. But where is the line where their protest is not interfering also on the rights of other citizens? And I think as civil society, as a country, as government, we have not invested intellectual resources in trying to figure out that middle line and how we can navigate it and enjoy the greater benefits of citizenship.
Thank you very much. We have run out of time, but I want, since they have built a very good case for you, all of them, like you say, in 1 minute, but also as your parting shots, and you will have to weigh in, but also tell us what's the way forward for Uganda in these times that you see the conditions are really changing.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, the space was quite squeezed. Absolutely one thing. I actually initially thought we had built some kind of consensus. So really, I was very excited about 10 minutes ago that we were on the same page. But yeah, I think we're concluding almost towards the end. But I still believe that it is possible. No, very clearly, Morison, you cannot say that, you cannot seem to suggest that this regime is very organized, very respected, very supported 100% by citizens, which by and large, in a nation state that is in charge, and particularly one who holds elections, even the losers, we should say, yes, we follow you. And actually, unlike Mr. Museveni, who refused to follow those who defeated him, we are absolutely fine. The point which actually was being made, which Sarah was suggesting to, was that, and where we actually all agree, let's all agree that something went wrong.
I did not say
and then in this case, in a particular way, the guys who did those funny things that you say, because Morison continuously suggests that there's some errant guys who went ahead and hit 54 people. Our point is, what have you done to those errant people? That is the point. My concluding remark, because I really don't want to take fast since time is short. My concluding remark is this: that, like we said earlier, sanctions are not necessarily desirable things for nation states. And Sarah, I gave a very contextual background at the beginning. They're not desirable. And most citizens really would not, and I don't know how many people are celebrating. People are simply saying that, yes, the rest of the world is beginning to listen. It's a pinching thing to particular individuals. The next lot, which actually I one time campaigned for, was very specific embargoes, which would be arms embargoes, for which, of course, maybe you guys are very lucky. America will not, because you're doing the bidding for them in Somalia and other places, and some people make money over it. It will be arms embargoes, or embargoes around Well, no, we can't. Let's discuss Somalia, and then you will be with me in the panel, and you realize
yes.
no. Arms embargo. And then number two, these equipments about funny tear gases which you break the people's eyes and ears. The trucks that these guys build up here, which are basically this gifted thing that we should stop giving this state, which instead of using soft power, are using whipping sticks to each citizens. Which citizens you claim they back them, but the parents who actually have very disciplined children, but want to use excess force against their children. Look, this is a tiny little warning shot to this nation states. I really not believe that we should go beyond this, but this government should wake up, recognize that the government, which has called them a government today rather than a regime, and let them show leadership, calm down, take responsibility, reach a situation in which we can begin to say the rule of law applies in the state, and fantastic lawyers like Mercy and Sarah can continue to guide us together with the rest of the state.
And as citizens, we should push for that and stop the Godfather.
We have done that, and for the last 35 years, there is nobody in this panel who has done more of that than myself.
Citizens.
Now, Rugyendo, as a way forward, yeah?
Yes.
And in these regressing democratic credentials of the country, what do you think it should be?
I think for me, like I said at the start, this thing we call international has been demystified by the rise of the rest, especially when you talk about the big five. There are others, there are other options, and it reminds us that states should have that mutual respect while dealing with each other. But I would want to say that I think to be able to have a better conversation in this country, we also need to balance the board. We need to point fingers all sides.
The both
Because like Morison was saying, how do you draw the line? How do you draw a line between a protest and a riot? Those are the questions we should ask. We are not asking questions like, before somebody shoots, what happened? Were they provoked or they weren't? Are the protesters violent or not? How are they dealing with law enforcement? These are some of the things. But we are talking about the state. Yes, the state has a responsibility definitely to protect everyone. But at the same time, what about us as citizens? Are we clean? Are we saints? When you are a leader, an opposition leader, as popular as my brother, whom we used to learn taekwondo together, by the way, he threatens and says, we're going to have a Libya here. And what do you expect the state to think? To follow their arms and they don't do anything? The other day you saw the Floyd crowd when crowded at the Floyd Square. The state knew definitely that these people who are crowded were not violent, but they were anticipating that this crowd could break up and become something else. So there were military vehicles everywhere, and I saw one American actually telling CNN that this country is so insecure. The military is all over the place, and we don't feel secure here, And then I said, okay, but this is the heaven that the Americans said to the rest of the world, but our citizens feel insecure by seeing military vehicles all over the place.
Because it's abnormal.
It became abnormal to them. But the point I am making is that we need to understand law enforcement and assist the state to exercise it, to execute it in a reasonable way, while us as citizens understand how to deal with law enforcement in terms of responsible engagement, responsible protesting, and responsible expression. And I think this is where the problem is starting. Why weren't you shot? Why the 54? Why? What could have been the issue? We have not interrogated that. We are only interrogating the issue of somebody shooting. But what could have happened? What could have happened from the other side? For me, that's where the problem is. And we want to think that the other side is innocent, and then we have what we call extrajudicial killings going on. And I think, for me, we need to take that debate a notch higher and understand why it took two to tango. And going forward, definitely. I really don't want to see my country sanctioned, and I want to tell my president, Mr. Museveni, please, you should let's engage, let's act, let's have a discussion, and let's demonstrate that we are a lawful country.
Thank you very much, Rugyendo. Taking the debates a notch higher and the conversations that are happening. This will go on and on the chat show UG hashtag. Chat show UG hashtag. Kindly follow the conversation there. Our time is up. We've actually exceeded time, but thank you very much for being with us. And please join these conversations on our live broadcast on YouTube,
Joseph is standing for
on Facebook. Kindly follow this conversation, and on Twitter the conversation are always going there. Yeah, Joseph is standing, but we need to go, and we'll invite him next time. Thank you very much, and thank you for being a good listener.
I hope we'll have a free stage there.